Welcome to today's webinar. Please log in to Qlik. You will be using it during the webinar. As you log in, please send me a quick note in the chat box to let me know you can hear me. Welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to the Early Access to English Learner Data Qlik application. My name is Jennifer Norton, Manager of English Learner Supports with the Division of Teaching and Learning, and I will be your facilitator today. I am also joined by my colleagues Chandy Wagner and Anika Harris, who are on standby to assist with questions. The purpose of this webinar is to provide directions, strategies, and practice using the EL Qlik app to strengthen your school or LEA's planning to welcome and support English learners. Together, we will explore key data points available in the app and discuss how these data can be used for planning. I will walk through the steps of using the app to answer specific questions. You will have time to start practicing using the app and to plan next steps for your LEA. Before we dive into using the app, I will point out several key resources and pieces of information that are critical for serving your school's English learners. First, the 1920 release of OSSE's English Learner Policies and Procedures is available on the OSSE website, and it is also attached as a handout to this webinar. This document should be your go-to reference for EL-related questions. It contains additional clarification and guidance on EL identification procedures, EL status for adult serving schools, and re-identifying previously exited English learners. In addition, OSSE has issued a checklist for English learner points of contact to help get the school year off to a smooth start. The link is here, and it is also located on the Start of School website. Also, OSSE has available a tool called Quality Programs for English Learners, a school readiness reflection tool. You can use this tool's rating system to self-assess on a comprehensive set of indicators related to English learner services. This tool is to be used by LEAs and schools for informational and planning purposes only. It is now in an editable format that will auto-calculate your results, so you can easily review areas of strength and areas of improvement and develop an action plan. So please take advantage of these tools that are available to you. Also want to give you just a very quick 5 things that English learner points of contact should know that are particularly timely for this webinar and for this time of year. 1, the EL Qlik application shows student level EL data for currently enrolled students and students expected to enroll for 1920 school year. 2, the EL Qlik app relies on enrollment data from My School DC until LEAs send enrollment information to the SLED. 3, the app is now available to principals as well as LEA data managers, heads of schools, and EL points of contact. 4, screeners only need to be administered 1 time, and there are limited exceptions to that, which you can find outlined in the EL Policies and Procedures document. 5, OSSE is here to assist LEAs in correcting EL data errors in their SIS, and we will go through common data errors and what to do about them later on in the webinar. Now, if you have not already done so, please log into Qlik. Send me a quick note in the chat box when you're in, and if you're having any trouble. Additionally, I'm going to launch a poll. The question is, what is your previous experience using this app? Okay, great. I hope everyone has successfully logged into the app, and I see that we have a range of experience using it, and I hope to address everyone's needs during this webinar. OSSE has created 3 early access Qlik applications. We are, of course, focusing on the English Learners Data app, but I want you to be aware that there's also one that focuses on early access to data regarding students with disabilities, and another one that focuses on high school transition. The purpose of the Early Access to English Learner Qlik application is that it allows LEAs to preview student-level English learner-related data for all the students who are pre-registered in the LEA. So this is particularly timely in the spring after the lottery has been completed and students are starting to pre-register. It also becomes extremely useful later in the summer when school rosters are becoming more firmed up and you're able to use the data here for planning purposes. Specifically, the data that are available include current EL status, historic EL status, screener scores, access scores, and then new this year and very exciting to have available are access growth target, re-identification of a student as English learner, if a student was ever an English learner, and enrollment audit EL status. So we will be looking at these data points and more as we go through the app today. In terms of who has access to the app, you can see the list here, and what's new is that access has been expanded to include principals. And the objective here is to make sure that relevant stakeholders have access to these data. Additionally, we anticipate that after exporting data from the app, that it will be shared with relevant school staff for collaborative purposes. Okay. And you will find now that the app has access, the most recent access scores, and the 2019-20 growth targets available to you. Now, as I mentioned in the 5 things to know, there's a detail about the source of the data that's important to understand. So before the LEA SIS switch over to the 1920 school year, My School DC is the data source for students who are pre-registered for the upcoming school year. And the LEA SIS is the data source for the 2018-19 enrollments. Once the LEA SIS switches over, then only the LEA SIS is the data source. So if you have a question about that, please talk to your data manager so you know what the data source is, and that will help you understand the data that you are looking at. Now, if you've already logged in, you should see 3 base sheets. One is a summary sheet, One is a student level sheet, and one is called Historic English Learners. Okay? So that's kind of like your home base. And we will be navigating within each of these sheets and across these sheets. One thing that I find useful is to become familiar with the tools that help you have easy navigation within a sheet. So in the upper left-hand corner, after you click on a sheet, you will see a search button, an undo button, a redo button, and a clear search button. So these are all very useful as you are conducting different searches and have a lot of different filters on. You can very easily click out of them to kind of get back to a starting point. And if you need to search for something specifically, say a student ID or student name, you can use the search button for that. In the upper right-hand corner of the app, you will see tools that make it very easy to navigate across the different sheets. So there are arrows, so you can toggle between the pages, or you see the page where you are listed, and if you click on the drop-down in the upper right corner, you'll see the different sheets listed and you can access them that way. Once you apply a filter to one sheet, it will stay applied when you go to a different sheet. And then this dotted line box with an arrow allows you to open and close data selection tools. So as we go through the app, we're going to be looking at 6 key points of data that can be helpful for starting for start of school planning. The first is number of EL students per grade and access proficiency level. Second, to identify whether transfer students are English learners. Third is to look at access growth targets. Fourth is to look at data for students who are considered long-term ELs, meaning that they have been in EL status for more than 5 years. And also dually identified students, that is those students who are both English learner and have special education status. Fifth, we can look at students who have monitored status and ever EL status, meaning at some point they were in English learner status. And you can also find languages spoken by students. There are so many different data points here that you can examine more than this. This is what we'll be focusing on today, not only how to access and filter these data points, but also how you may use these data in your planning. First, we will use the app to examine how many English learners an LEA or school campus has, and then sort by proficiency level. So you can use these data to plan for English learner services and staffing. Let me point out now that you have a handout that is attached, and if you are able to open it at this time, please do, because it will serve as a handy guide as we walk through the app, and it contains all of the steps for using the app and guiding questions related to planning. Some questions that you might consider as you look at how many students you have per grade and their proficiency levels are thinking about what program model your LEA uses to provide language assistance to EL students, and does that match the students' needs? How many staff do you need to support EL students in each grade, given your program model and your student population? And particularly as you think about the different proficiency levels of students in each grade, how can you differentiate the EL supports that they receive in alignment, of course, with your program model? And then on a logistical standpoint, what scheduling do you need to to plan out in such a way that will meet your EL students' needs. This is an example with made-up numbers in it, but you will be able to extract the number of English learners by grade and proficiency level, and you can turn it into a simple chart like this to help gain a better sense of your students' current proficiency and how you might plan for supports and scheduling. For example, if you were looking at this chart and noticed that you had a fairly wide spread of proficiency levels across each grade, that can make you think about how you can schedule for how much time of services a student may need who's more of a newcomer versus a student who is more proficient, and to think about scheduling and issues related to the level of support that a student may or may not need. Okay, so in a moment, we will pop out of the PowerPoint and go into using the app, and these are the steps that we will follow. These are also listed in the handout step by step. So first, we will go to the EL student level data page, and then filter in the top left corner for EL 2018-19 and choose yes. And then from there, it's super easy. We can search by grade by clicking on the magnifying glass and filtering out whichever grades we are interested in. And we will see blue bars at the top that create a graph. And we can use that to see more information by level of proficiency on screeners, access, and alt access. So we will exit this PowerPoint now and switch to the app to show you that in action. Okay, so here we are on the base sheets. These are the 3 sheets that I mentioned. We are in a training app, so there's no real data that you would be seeing. And what you see when you log in is our data that have been updated with most recent access scores. And this training app does have the older scores, so that is the reason for a little bit of a mismatch. But know that you will not be seeing real student data today. Okay, I'm going to start by going to the English Learners student level data sheet. Then in the top left corner here, we see EL 2018-19. I'm going to click, and I'm going to choose yes. Then you see you have all these columns that go clear across the screen: student name, date of birth, grade, LEA, sending school, receiving school, and so on. And you can use the scroll bar to go across so you can see all of the data that are available. So if you haven't done this yet, I encourage you to explore and scroll to the right. You'll be able to see screener status, monitored status from 2018-19, most recent access testing year, proficiency level, whether the student is duly identified, what's listed as native language, Everell, and so forth, all the way across to growth targets. The recent enhancements to the app make this super, super easy. These magnifying glasses here allow you to select and filter. So we'll do one example together. Under grade, I'm going to choose first grade. You may choose to select all of the grades for your school or LEA and then export that all together and then do your sorting just in your exported spreadsheet. For this example, we'll just look at one grade. Okay, So now when I scroll, I'm only going to see students who are in first grade. Okay. I can also come here and see what is their most recent access proficiency level. And I can select specific ones. Let's say I want to see my students who are under 2.0 and have a sense of that. Okay. So when I choose that, I can see that I have 5 students in first grade, all of whom have a proficiency level under 2.0. So these are going to be my newcomers. That's something that I'm thinking about. Similarly, you can put on different filters as needed, depending on what it is you want to look at specifically. And something that will be useful is to export the data, which will go to a spreadsheet, so then you can manipulate the data there. So you might want to put on fewer filters and take more data and then sort in that format. Now the filters that I've put on are up here. So let's say I want to get out of that. I can just go up to the top and clear the selection. That was the access level. Let's clear the grade and come back here. So since this is our first time going into the app and looking at it together, and hopefully you're able to do some clicking and searching as well, I would like to put out there, does anyone have any questions right now? Could you please take a moment to type questions into the chat box? Okay. Feel free to send your questions at any time, but since we haven't received any yet, we will keep on going. I'm going to return back to the PowerPoint for a moment. And we're going to look at transfer students who have English learner status. If a student is identified as an English learner in the early access to EL data application in Qlik or SLED, please note you do not need to rescreen that student. If a student who is a transfer is not an EL in Qlik and has a screener status of proficient, accept the screener data as valid and do not rescreen the student. Now there are potential exceptions, and in those cases, please refer to the EL policies and procedures document. What's critical and really useful about this app is that when students transfer, the ability to look for their name in this app and identify from the get-go if a student has been identified as English learner means that you can more quickly make sure that the student has an EL program in place and is on track to start off the school year with teachers who know about the student's status and are prepared to provide English learner services. It's also really helpful to have a sense of across the grades, how many new students do we have who are English learners? School populations can change from year to year, and organizing the data in such a way to have an understanding of how many new students you have who need English learner services is really helpful. And it can help you to start to think about, how do I get to know these students and their families so that we can welcome them to the school and have them get started here on the smoothest start possible. To access this information, we will first go to the English Learner Summary sheet and then filter by status in the top left corner, selecting school year 19-20 new pre-enrolled, and then going back out to a different sheet, to the student level data sheet, and then searching by grade, either sorting by a particular grade or looking at all to see the results. So I will exit now from the PowerPoint and go back to the app to show you this. Okay, so here you're going to see me toggling between sheets. I'm in the student level one, so now I'm going to click out to the summary page. And here's the student status section. Okay, and here I want to see the students who are new pre-enrolled for 19-20. Yes. Okay. And again, what you're seeing on the screen now is includes more than just one LEA. So that's why it looks like a lot. And we're going to go to the student level sheet now. I'm accessing that a different way just by using the arrow. And then here I can look at the grade. I've sorted now by grade. So here are all the 4 students in grade 1. I can scroll down and see how many students are in the other grades. Okay, so this data can be easily exported. If you right-click on the column, you can click Export, Export Data, and then you can download your file. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, these blue bars at the top are providing information on number of students by proficiency level. And note that this is only going to list the students who do have a test score. So you may have students in this list who, for whatever reason, did not have a test score. Okay. Now let's look at access growth targets. So this is derived from students' previous score, and it is the scale score the student needs to meet to be considered making adequate growth from year to year. And this is recalculated and updated after the data validation for that year, for this year would be 2018-19, is finalized. So if you have a student who is coming into DC schools new and is being screened and therefore does not have an access score, okay, for that student you will know their screener score. You will not have an access growth target for them because they haven't taken access yet. Okay? After the student takes access in the second half of the school year, that score will then be used to create this growth target. For students who have been in the English Learner program for more than a year, they will already have a growth target that's available in Qlik. What is really useful about having this available now is that it can be used to develop language goals with the student, so the student and the teacher and the family understand where the student is currently in their language proficiency and where the student would like to go or needs to go. This can be useful for the teacher in developing instructional plans specifically within lessons, but also looking at across the year, what are the overall overarching objectives for moving the student forward in their proficiency. And then this can also be used to communicate with families about where a student currently is in proficiency and what those goals are. This is a simple chart that is an example of the information that can be extracted from the Qlik app. So you will see the student's composite score from Access, which combines their performance on the domains of listening, reading, speaking, and writing, and then the growth target for the next year. You can also look at what growth has already occurred from a previous year if that's available. And you can also pull the specific domain level scores so that you can have a sense of a student's strengths and areas of focus within each domain. So I'm looking here at this sample, and I'm noticing that the student is really strongest in listening and speaking, over 4.0, and also at 4.0 in reading. And in the area of writing, the student is at a 3.7, and it makes me think about looking back at what is the description of what it means to be at a level 3 or level 4, so that I can think about where the student is now and where the student needs to go, and potentially focusing on writing instruction with extra attention this year. There are resources such as the can-do descriptors from WIDA that can be helpful in developing these goals. I would also like to use this time to point out that we are going to have additional webinars related to using English learner data. One focuses specifically on the Access growth target and how to use it. So please stay tuned for that. It will be held on September 5th. And you will get a link to register for that after this webinar. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, so we will go ahead and practice in just a moment. The steps that we will follow are to start at the student level data page. And then I have this in red here because what I have in the training app is actually a year behind. You'll be able to click on a student who has a 2018-19 score and then scroll and find their 2019-20 growth target. After you select a student, we're going to switch pages. We'll go to the Historic English Learners page, and that's where you will see the domain level scores. Okay, so I'm going to go and show you that right now. Okay, so I am just going to choose one student. Oops. Okay, so here I have selected one student. I'm going to scroll across. I can see their most recent Access proficiency level. And keep going. I can see their growth target here. I can pull that information out. Now to find their domain scores, I'm going to go to the Historic English Learners page, and the student comes up. And then as I scroll, I'm able to see the student's proficiency level by domain. So the student had a listening proficiency level of 5.7, speaking 6.0, reading 4.1, etc. Okay, and you can see there is additional information related to the student and their status, their EL status in the past. Okay, and just to remember that once I put that filter on, it does stay across the sheets. So let's say you wanted to filter by include, let's say, all of the first graders, and then come to the historic learners page. That's who you would see here, and you can export these different sheets so that you can work with the data on your own afterwards. Okay. The next piece that we will talk about is related to students who are long-term English learners and dually identified English learners. So before I go back to the PowerPoint, I'll just walk through those steps with you now. I'm going to clear out the filter that's here, and I'm going to go back and start on the student level page. Okay, and remove this. Okay. Actually, I think that's just okay, just a second. Here, first identified.
So, okay, so they've changed the format a little bit of what's on the screen. Oh, here it is. So on the far left-hand side now, it's moved over for Smart Search, so you can click on that button, and then just from that button, you can look for any field name that you are interested in finding.
All right. Okay, thank you for your patience. So here we have our box with the arrow, and we can search for students with disability here. Okay, so we have our dually identified students. We want to make sure that we have this 1819 button clicked to yes. Okay, and let's do a search for year student first identified. Oh, wait. And then when you are, let's see, able to filter here by dually identified, click yes. Then the students who you see who are listed should be only those students who are dually identified. So that's a filter that you can put on in the app and then export accordingly if you would like to do it that way. Okay. So this is particularly helpful when looking at students' growth targets and their most recent access scores to reflect on the students' needs and how to support them. It also can help to start to have that conversation on planning for both special education services and English learner services so that they can be coordinated and you have sufficient staff providing for the students' needs. Okay. So of course, as you export the data, you can organize it in various ways. And this is just an example of a summary chart that you might consider making to understand who are the students who are identified as both English learner and students with disabilities. And then when we go back, we'll go and we will look up students who are considered long-term Ls. So what we'll do is we will filter by when the students have been EL. So if they have been in EL status before the year 2015-16, that means that they have been in a status for more than 5 years, or for 5 years. And it's important to just focus on where those students are and be aware of that and see what do they need to help them progress and move through proficiency. Okay. So these are the steps, which are also in your handout. And we will go ahead and go back and do the year student first identified. Okay. So we're going to go to the sheet that says historic English learners. Okay. And then here we can go to the column that says year student identified as English learner. So you got to scroll for that. And then there is a magnifying glass here. So we can look at selecting, move this a little bit on my screen so I can scroll. I'm going to select 2015-16. So here I have now sorted so I can see how many students do I have who have been in English learner status for that long. Okay, so now I know who they are and I can look at their access scores and see what's going on there. And that's a good place to start having a conversation about what might be going on with these students and what extra focus for instruction might be helpful in helping a student to make progress. So again, these proficiency levels overall as well as by domain are really helpful in looking at that and making those plans. Okay. Similarly, students who have been exited from English Learner Services and are in monitored status need to have some kind of system for monitoring the students and how they're doing. You can use this app to identify which students are in this status, and then you likely already have a system in place, but you can prepare your system specifically for monitoring these students. You can see what grades they're in and start to think about who would be the staff who are named as those people who would check in with these students to monitor how they were doing and who would be responsible for documenting that monitoring is happening and helping support the students in whatever way they need. Okay, this is an example of how you could chart that out and communicate about that with other staff. And then we will go in and look at this. It's in the main student level page, and I will show you how we can click to find that. Okay. Okay. Great, we have a question that we will be typing out an answer to, and it's about a certain code for a type of score, which is A3, and that is an indication that the test that was given was the alternate access test. Okay, so very quickly, I'm going to go back to the student level page and just show you how we can scroll over to monitored status, and we can, okay, I just sorted that for year 1 through 4 if you want to look at a certain year, and you can see how many students are in that particular status. So that is a great way to easily pull out that information and get a snapshot of who your monitored students are. Okay. Finally, I'm going to go to the summary level page very quickly and show you at this level, you can look at a summary of the students, how many students speak different languages at your school. And this is really helpful for starting to get a sense of, okay, for language access, what languages might I want to or need to translate materials into? And are there languages that are different and from what we have had represented at our school in the past? And this is new for your school to get to know, and particularly if you have new students who are enrolling, it's important to find out this information so you can get to know the students and their families and help welcome them into your school. And it can give a great snapshot of the diversity of languages that are represented in your school. Okay. I'm going to transition back out to the presentation. We talked about how to find languages, charting it. These are the steps, which are also in your handout. And just as your own little self-check, think about 2 EL-related pieces of data that appear in your SIS, and what are 2 ways that you can use the app for planning purposes. So if you wouldn't mind quickly writing an answer in the chat box about 2 ways you can use the app for planning purposes, and then also think about a next step at your LEA. Okay, so one way you can use this app is to share information with other teachers. Great. Okay, let's keep going. And we're going to switch gears and talk about resolving data errors. I'm going to turn it over to Chandy Wagner to talk through the data errors piece, since she is in the division that handles these.
Sure. So data errors matter because we want to make sure that our students are appropriately identified and receiving appropriate services. So if we have an error, it might be that we're under-identifying students. So a student was previously EL, they have not scored proficient on access yet. If your LEA doesn't recognize that they are an English learner, they are not receiving the services that they are entitled to and should be receiving to make sure that they're progressing in English. And there's also the risk of over-identifying. A student might have previously exited or scored proficient on a screener and never been entered. And so you want to make sure that we have the right information on our students so that we can appropriately serve them. We have multiple ways of resolving data errors. Most of the time that's through OST tickets, and I would also recommend you talk with your LEA data managers if they are seeing those unified data errors. So the first kind of error, you'll see these in the Unified Data Errors tab under Assessment Errors because it's tied to access. So these are students who are identified as English learners since 2014 or 15 or later. They're in grades kindergarten or higher, or really first grade, sorry, because they would have tested the year before, but they've not taken access or they have not scored proficient on access. And so the main thing is that you need to make sure your students are being assessed on access so that we can see how they are progressing and determine if they no longer need English learner services if they score proficient. The next one, there are students who are classified as English learners but don't have a screener or access score. Again, make sure that those students are taking access in school year 1920, really, because that's the upcoming year. And then there's students whose screener status is proficient, but they're classified as English learners. And so these are students, if you're looking through the Qlik app and you're saying, hey, this shows that this student is proficient, why are they an English learner? Remember that if students screen proficient and they've never been identified as English learners in the past, they should not be identified as English learners. It's only if they're not proficient or if they have previously been identified as English learners in the past. So make sure that you have the correct screener status in your school SIS. If you ever have questions about an English learner status, please submit an OST ticket. We are happy to help you figure out the correct identification for that student. As a reminder, if the parent waived services, the students should be identified as English learners. And so if you've told us through your SIS that the parents have waived services, but the student is not being labeled as EL in your SIS, that really just needs to be an update to your school SIS to indicate that they are English learners. They're just not receiving services because of the parent waiver. There are students, this is a data error, potentially, not in every case, but we have a lot of students who are English learners, but who in your school SIS, it says the native language is English. That may be true for some students, especially if they've come to you, they were previously identified as English learners. At this point, they're predominantly English speakers, or that's what the parents put on the home language survey. We understand that this may not always be an error, but for a lot of students, it likely is. If they're identified as an English learner, for most students, that's because they have a different native language that they speak at home. So please be sure to enter that correct native language. In the Unified Data Errors tab, as previously mentioned, the big error here is that students have been identified by OSCE as English learners based on previous English learner statuses and not scoring proficient yet on access. And then your SIS may tell us that your LEA believes that student is not an English learner. So the resolution to that is to either update your SIS to show that the student is an English learner, make sure that you're providing appropriate services and assessing them on access at the end of the school year. Or if that is truly an error and they were misidentified by a previous LEA and the student only speaks English at home, that's all that's on the home language survey, that's what the parents have communicated with you. There's an EL exceptions policy that is in the English Learner Guidebook, so please check that out, submit an OST ticket, and we're happy to help you get those true errors resolved. If you are having login issues with Qlik or with SLED or anything else, like most of our answers for errors or questions, please submit an OSCE support tool or OST ticket to make sure that we can get you correct access.
Great, thank you, Chandy. At this time, if you have any final questions, please type them in the chat box and we will answer them. And we are also available following this if you would like to get in touch. We will share our contact information. We have 2 additional webinars that focus on English learner data, which are listed here. The Access Growth Target and how to use it in September, and English learners and the STAR framework in October. You will receive the link to register for these after the webinar. And we also have numerous upcoming professional development opportunities, and I am highlighting just 2 of them here. One is a 3-part English language acquisition workshop series that will be offered several times beginning in September. And we also have a monthly webinar that occurs the 2nd Thursday of every month. So please consider registering for both of these or sharing this information with teachers at your LEA. If you are interested in professional development related to other topics, here's a list of contact information for our team. And finally, we have resources that I have included as attachments to the webinar, and as well, on-site technical assistance and EL program support are available. You can contact Anika, me, as needed. We are very happy to help. And for dual language programs, you may contact Santiago Sanchez. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this webinar. This concludes the presentation. Thank you.